Hi, I'm Steve. You can call me Steve. Given that this series is called Science Isn't Scary, I should probably talk about sciencey things that people find scary. This video will be the first in a sub-series along these lines. I'll start with something near and dear to my heart: chemistry. I'm a chemist. I have a master's and most of a PhD in chemistry. Having worked with chemicals since I started university in 1998, I've gotten comfortable and a bit blasé around them. However, most people don't have my familiarity with them and tend to be a bit leery of them, without fully understanding what they are. I'm not going to dwell too much on why that is. I can't speak on behalf of other people or their motivations, but for most of them, those fears are based on reasons that they believe are valid. First off, we need to define what chemicals are. The usual snarky answer from chemists is that everything's a chemical, which is technically true, the best kind of true. Anything made of atoms is made of chemicals. Trees, people, telephones, old-fashioned glazed timbits, polydimethylsiloxane. The distinction most normal people make is between natural and artificial, things found in nature and things made in a lab. I need to take issue with that last one. Speaking as someone who works in the lab, most artificial substances you come in contact with are not made there. We make very, very tiny amounts of chemicals, far less than what's required to supply the needs of the manufacturing industry. The stuff you buy is made at chemical plants. But I digress. This divide between natural and artificial is, well, artificial. A chemical's properties are defined by its molecular structure, not how it's made. For example, the smell of vanilla primarily comes from a molecule called vanillin, which looks like this. You can also synthesize artificial vanillin, which looks like this. They're the same molecule, the only difference being one came from a plant and one came from a vat. The reason the artificial stuff doesn't taste exactly like the real stuff is because natural vanilla actually contains a whole potpourri of other chemicals that contribute to the overall taste and aroma. The artificial stuff usually only contains vanillin. The debate over whether or not that's a bad thing I will leave for the foodies. But if artificial chemicals aren't necessarily bad, why do we keep hearing all sorts of news stories about how they're bad for you? Some of them are, some of them aren't. I won't pretend there aren't legitimate concerns and dangers. The history of the chemical industry is littered with bad practice and bad decisions. Poor understanding and weak regulation have led to tragedies like thalidomide and the Bhopal disaster. The good news is that's changing. There's a field called green chemistry, which aims to reduce harm and eliminate waste and toxic byproducts. Likewise, some natural chemicals are good for you and some aren't. There are thousands, if not millions, of different species of plants and animals that carry toxic chemicals in their tissues as a way to avoid being eaten or to kill their prey so they can eat it. Aconite, hemlock, the black widow spider, and the rattlesnake are just a few of the organisms that produce substances harmful to humans. On the other hand, the willow, the Pacific yew, the penicillium mold, and the ubiquitous cow all produce chemicals beneficial to humans. The willow in particular produces a chemical called salicylic acid, which has been known for centuries to be a pain reliever. That chemical can then undergo reactions in chemical plants to become acetyl salicylic acid, better known as aspirin. There's a field called natural products chemistry, which identifies chemicals from plants that it can then modify with chemical techniques to produce more effective drugs. The point I'm making here is that you have to judge each chemical on a case-by-case basis. You can't simply make the broad assumption that if it's bad, it's not natural. You probably don't have the educational background to make those judgments on your own, and that's okay. In most cases, I don't either. That's why we have experts, people whose job it is to know a lot about one subject and then explain those things to everybody else. Medical doctors, toxicologists, and public health experts are your friends here. People on the internet claiming they've discovered a miracle health cure which they will then sell to you for $29.95 are not your friends. They're either misinformed or outright scammers, and they are not going to help you, they are going to take your money. One of their approaches is to demonize science and scientists and to lower your trust in us. Don't let them. There's no such thing as a cure-all. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is, especially if it's being sold over the internet. Likewise, someone promoting a chemical-free product is making a nonsense statement. If you can pick it up or touch it, it contains chemical compounds. A lot of the time, these labels are fraudulent, as there's no regulation governing who is and is not allowed to slap them on their products. Even if something is harmful, it generally requires a certain amount of it to cause harm. There's a saying that dose makes the poison. A lot of harmful things are only harmful at high concentrations and are perfectly safe if you're only exposed to a small amount. Fluoride is a good example of this. Some communities fluoridate their water with fluorosilicic acid, which opponents describe as an industrial byproduct, which it technically is. Again, you can't judge a chemical based on where it comes from or what other uses it might have. Fluoride in low doses improves the health of your teeth. Fluoride in high doses causes mottling of your teeth. The solution? Ensure the amount of fluoride in the water remains at low dose. This requires monitoring and regulatory oversight, but it's perfectly safe. Dose makes the poison. That's chemicals. They're not something you can easily categorize based on simple labels. They also require a strong regulatory environment to protect the public from bad actors and unscrupulous producers. Trying to avoid artificial compounds entirely is neither feasible nor useful. The best you can do is take it on a case-by-case basis. Thanks for watching. I've been Steve.